A dad I know shared with me last week that his 15-year-old son had just started lying. Nothing huge, just small things. Where he was, who he was with, whether homework was done. And this dad is obviously disappointed. So he told his son, "I'm disappointed with what you did. People who lie become liars. People who steal become thieves. You become what you repeatedly do. But I know you're better than that. That's not who you are." And he asked me, did I handle this right? I said, yeah, you did. Because here's what he did that most dads miss. He named the path his son was on. People who lie become liars. But then he spoke vision over his son. That's not who you are. You're better than that. Now, there's a ton of personalities in the parenting world that would say, no, you shouldn't do that. It's no big deal. Speaking that way to your son is shaming him. Well, I disagree. That's not shame. That's not control. That's leadership. So what do you do when your teenager begins to lie to you? I'm going to give you a framework that holds 4 things in tension that I think will help with your response. Let me start by saying something that might give you some relief. If your kid is lying to you right now, you're not alone. And honestly, you probably did the same thing when you were their age. Most of us lied to our parents. Maybe about where we were going, who we were with, whether we finished our chores. And if being honest, we probably did worse things than our kids have done. So when we see our kids lying, it stings. Not just because they're doing wrong, but because we know exactly where that road can lead. We've been there. And that disappointment you feel is not a bad thing. That's actually part of being a good father. You're disappointed because you have a vision for who your child can become, and lying doesn't fit that vision. But here's where we have to be careful. It's easy to let that disappointment turn into control. It's easy to clamp down too much, to lecture for 30 minutes, to shame, and to create an environment where your kids learn to hide mistakes instead of learning to grow from them. The goal isn't to raise kids who just obey when you're watching. The goal is to raise kids who develop character, who become the kind of people who tell the truth even when it's hard. That's what all of us want. And that requires something different than control. It requires leadership. So let me give you the framework. Now, these are not fail-safe answers. You have to navigate this yourself, figuring out for yourself what to say, what not to say, what to do, and what not to do. It's not easy, but I think if you hold these 4 things in balance and in the tension of raising a teenager, they will help. Here's the first response. Give space for your kids to fail. Listen, your teenager is going to mess up. At some point, they're going to lie. They're going to make bad choices. They're going to disappoint you. That's not a sign you're a bad father. That's not a sign they're a bad child. That's a sign they're human. Proverbs 24:16 says, "For though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again." Notice it doesn't say if they fall. It says when they fall. And it's the righteous that keep falling. Failure is part of the process of growth. I think just acknowledging that and normalizing that reality is helpful. Your job isn't to prevent every mistake. Your job is to be there when they fall, even if they do so intentionally and rebelliously, knowing we did the same thing, and then help them get back up with dignity intact. Here's the second response. Don't excuse wrong behavior. Now, giving space to fail doesn't mean you excuse it. It doesn't mean you say, oh, all kids lie, it's just a phase. That's permissive parenting, and it's weak. Giving space and grace to fail doesn't mean to accept the behavior. It does mean, however, not to reject the child. When your kid lies, there needs to be a consequence, not rage, not shaming, but a real consequence that teaches them that this matters. And as always, the consequence should be measured based upon who your child is, the severity of the offense, and the exact circumstances surrounding it. The consequences should sting, but should not be over the top. Okay, time for a shameless commercial. I talk about this in detail in my video course called Brave Boundaries, Keys to Effective Loving Discipline for Every Age. You can find it at fatherfriend.net. It provides a ton of helpful information on this topic, and I hope you'll check it out. So the consequence doesn't have to be massive, but it does have to be consistent and connected to the offense. If they lied about where they were, they lose the privilege of going out for a week. If they lied about homework, you or mom check their homework every day for the next couple of weeks. or you take away the cell phone for a few days. Whatever the consequence, it has to sting. Remember, people change when the pain of their behavior is worse than the pleasure of their behavior. That's true for all of us. It's true for your child too. The consequence teaches the seriousness of the choice. And then you move on. You don't hold it over their heads for months. You don't act as if they're always lying. Let them rebuild trust. Hebrews 12:11 says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but later on it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." Discipline isn't punishment, it's training, and training requires both correction and vision, which leads to the next response. Third response, always share vision with your child of who they truly are. Now, this is the part most dads miss. We're really good at naming the problem, "you lied," but we're not good at speaking the vision. That's not who you are. You're better than that. Your teenager is forming their identity right now, and they're listening to the voices around them, friends, social media, teachers, their inner voice. But even if they don't know it or admit it, that voice that matters most is yours. So what will your voice be in this season? When you say, "I love you, and I know that's not who you are, you're better than that," you're giving them a vision to grow into. That's not excusing the behavior. It's separating the behavior from the person. You're rejecting the behavior and not them. You're saying, "This choice was wrong, but you are not defined by this choice." None of us want to be defined by our worst decisions, do we? So don't judge your children. Correct them. Train them. That's what my friend did. He named the trajectory. People who lie become liars. But then he spoke belief. "I don't believe that's who you are." And here's what's critical. That statement has to be genuine. You can't just say the words. You actually have to believe it. Because for goodness sake, do not begin to see your child as a liar. Don't allow that judgment to be lodged in your mind. If you see them that way, they will begin to see themselves that way. This is the power of your projected vision as a father. Your kids pick up on what you actually believe about them, not just what you say. If you genuinely believe this was a bad choice, but that's not who he is. If you hold out absolute eternal optimism that your child is what you believe about them, that changes everything. So the statement, "That's not who you are," isn't just a line you deliver. It's a conviction you hold, and your teenager will feel the difference. And that's the crux of leadership. Healthy fear and respect for authority is good and biblical. In our Christian worldview, there's a place for kids to respect, and yes, even fear godly authority. But fear alone doesn't produce character. It has to be paired with vision of who they become. And here's the fourth and final response. Embrace this season of fatherhood by knowing it's going to be tough for you and your child. Here's what I want you to understand. These teenage years aren't a problem to solve. They're a tension to manage. Took me a while to figure that out. You're not going to quote unquote fix your teenager. You're going to walk alongside them for 5 to 7 years while they figure out who they are and what they believe. And it's going to be messy. At times it's going to be chaotic. There's going to be ambiguity. My background is leadership, and in leadership theory, there's something called chaos theory or complexity theory. It says that complex systems can't be controlled or even predicted, that effective leaders should be comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity and provide presence through the chaos. There may be nothing more complex than raising a teenager. So these years are about walking with them and controlling less, just making sure the wheels don't fall off, or as we say in the South, keeping them between the ditches. That's your role as a father during these years. You're the steady anchor. Your teenager is going to test boundaries. They're going to push back. They're going to lie. They're going to fail. They're going to make choices that disappoint you. Your job isn't to freak out every time or to seek eternal control over them, because if you become over-emotional or over-disappointed, you're falling prey to judging and shaming them, and that's the exact opposite of what they need. You know, research supports this. A research study in 2022 reviewed 53 other studies and found that a parent's emotional regulation skills are significantly associated with their children's adjustment outcomes. In other words, parents who demonstrate better emotional regulation show more positive parenting behaviors. and their children show better regulation themselves, as well as fewer behavioral problems. The study emphasized that it wasn't the absence of conflict that mattered. It was the parent's ability to remain emotionally stable and consistent during those conflicts. Your goal as a dad is to have a non-anxious presence, to not let them see you sweat, to provide calm, consistent leadership while they go through the process of becoming. It's like magic for a teen going through the chaos of adolescence. Because here's what's happening developmentally. Your teenager is forming their identity, and forming identity requires them to process, fail, learn, try, realize, and own their choices. They're deciding for themselves whether what you've always taught them is true. So they need to try and fail in order to define what's important to them. What are the things they will value in life? Like telling the truth when it's hard. You can't do that for them, but you can undermine it by overreacting, by not giving them space to fail, or by crushing their spirit with shame. You can also undermine it by being permissive and excusing the behavior. Remember, it's a tension to manage, not a problem to solve. It's not going to be neat. It's not going to be predictable, but in time, with you being the steady anchor, they'll come out of it. My kids did. Yours will too. So there it is. Let's recap. When your kids lie to you, response number 1, give space for failure. Stay calm. This is the moment that determines whether they'll be honest with you next time. If you explode, you just taught them to hide. Response number 2, give a consequence that fits. Not rage, not shaming, but a real, non-emotional consequence that teaches them this matters. Response number 3, speak the vision. I love you, but that's not who you are. You're better than that. And then move on. Don't lecture for 30 minutes. Don't bring it up every day for the next month. Say what needs to be said, give the consequence, speak the vision, and move on. And response number 4, embrace this season. It's tough, but it's supposed to be. All good things are tough. Whether you like it or not, Dad, tough is what you signed up for when you became a father. Your steadiness behind your words and actions is just as important as the words and actions themselves. Here's the difference between raising a kid who just obeys and raising a kid who develops character. Kids who are just controlled learn to hide. They learn to comply when you're watching and rebel when you're not. They develop skills in deception because their motivation is avoiding punishment. However, kids who are led learn to grow and have morality. They learn that their choices matter, that you believe in them, and that even when they fail, you're still there. They develop character because their motivation is becoming the person you've shown them that they can be, the person that you believe them to be, and in the end, the person they want to be. They'll become what you've spoken over them. So speak vision. Yes, people who lie can become liars, but people who are loved, led, disciplined, and given vision, they become men and women of character. And that's the goal. Dad, you can do this.